Narayana IAS. I'm Yogesh Kottavar and I will be taking up daily news analysis of The Hindu and Indian Express. We'll discuss 5 most important articles from these newspapers. The first article, which is published on page number 1 of The Hindu, talks about Muslim women's right to get maintenance. Supreme Court has recently come up with a judgment which talks about maintenance rights. So we will understand what is maintenance, what the Supreme Court is trying to say, and the earlier judgments related to the same issue. It is important from the perspective of polity and governance, so we'll understand it in detail. The second article, published on the page number 10 of The Hindu, it talks about caste census. Now this caste census is a very controversial issue. Many political parties are consistently putting pressure on the central government to conduct caste census. So we'll understand what is census, what is caste census, and the issue around this caste census, why some parties are supporting it and why some individuals are opposing it. The third article we'll discuss is from Indian Express, page number 13. This article talks about a mega dam being built in Arunachal Pradesh on the river Siang. There are many activists who are saying that we don't want this project at all in Arunachal Pradesh. So we'll understand what is the controversy around this dam. The next article, given on page number 14 of The Hindu, it talks about FCRA registration. Recently, Union Home Ministry has cancelled the FCRA registration of an NGO. So we'll understand what is this registration all about. And in prelims, FCRA can be directly asked. The next article is published in the science section of The Hindu. It talks about deep drilling program. Scientists are conducting some experiments to understand the phenomena of earthquake by drilling the earth till 6 to 7 kilometers. So we'll understand the entire program and how it will going to benefit us. After this, we'll also discuss some prelims and mains practice questions so that you can get an idea what kind of questions can be expected from these articles. So let's get started. So the first article is about the Supreme Court's judgment on Muslim women's right to get maintenance. This article is important and we need to study section 125 of CRPC and the earlier Supreme Court's judgment related to the same issue. You can relate it with the syllabus of GS paper 2 social justice. We can first understand one previous year questions so that we can get an idea about what kind of questions can be asked in the paper. One question is, discuss the possible factors that inhibit India from enacting for its citizens a uniform civil code as provided for in the Directive Principles of State Policy. Let's first discuss the article. You'll get an idea about writing answers to these questions. The article, the context of the article says that there is a couple from Telangana who went to Telangana High Court and then went to Supreme Court regarding the issue of maintenance. Here, the Supreme Court has clearly said that the women should get maintenance under section 125 of the CRPC, Code of Criminal Procedure. But the first question is, what is maintenance? You can look at any family in which there is one person who is dependent and there is one person who is independent. Independent means the person is earning money, the person is capable of living his life on his own. But there are some individuals whom I am saying they are dependent. So the responsibility of these individuals lies on this independent person. Responsibility includes the food expenses, basic living standards, everything will be taken care of by this independent person. Now, in case there is a divorce among these two individuals. So after the divorce, this independent person may say, I'll not pay for your food, I'll not pay for your any kind of expense. In that case, we are saying there should be some security or some insurance provided to these dependent individuals. Now, these dependent individuals could be the wife of that person, could be children, or maybe his or her parents. In that case, whatever amount this independent person should pay to these dependent persons even after divorce is called as maintenance amount. Now, if you look at Indian laws, the CRPC section 125 says that a person after divorce will have to pay his wife the some particular amount that will be decided with the help of the district magistrate, but that amount has to be paid. That means the maintenance has to be paid. Now, what happened in this case? is that the women went to Supreme Court saying that under this act, I should get maintenance, but my husband is refusing to pay me that amount. Now, what husband is saying, he says, this section 125, I am not liable to pay amount through this act. Rather, I have another act called Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986, and I will pay the amount according to this act. And he says that I've already paid the amount. Now, what is this act? We need to understand how this act came into picture. You look at Indian legal system. There is one legal system, one law called criminal law and other one called as civil law. Criminal law is same for all individuals living in India. But civil laws are not same. We still do not have uniform civil code. So if you look at the personal laws, such as any law which includes marriage, divorce, inheritance, maintenance, everything is included in the personal law. And these personal laws are not same for all individuals in India. Rather, Hindus will have different law, Muslims will have different law, other community will have different law altogether. In that case, if we specifically talk about Muslim women, what we observe is that they are getting the maintenance amount but only through their personal law, Muslim personal law. And that law says that there should be maintenance amount to be provided to the Muslim women, but only for the period of iddat. Now, what is this period of iddat? You can look at any Muslim family, any Muslim couple, if they get divorced. In that case, there is a time period of 3 months in which the women cannot marry another guy. She will have to wait for 3 months. It is said that for the emotional adjustment after divorce requires some cooling off period. And also, it is very important to see if the lady can get pregnant. In case she gets pregnant, we can know who is the father of that child. So for that thing, this period of iddat has been mentioned under the personal laws of Muslims. So what it says is that husband is obliged to pay the maintenance amount to this Muslim women only for this 3-month period. And after that, the woman will have to take care of herself on her own. He will not be responsible for anything. Now, this was the earlier case. But what happened is that after a few years, that is especially in 1985, there's a landmark case called Shah Bano case. In this case, the women argued that I am an old lady. I have given entire life to my husband and now suddenly he has left me. Where should I go? In that case, Supreme Court said that you will be provided with the maintenance even after the iddat period, and that will not be under the personal law, rather that will be under section 125 of the CRPC. Now, please understand the difference that section 125 of CRPC, it's a secular law. That means it is applicable to all women irrespective of their religion. But personal law is very much religion specific. Now, what happened is that in 1985, Supreme Court gave that judgment. But in 1986, that is the next year itself, the government of that time, Rajiv Gandhi government, came up with an act. And this is the act, Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986. This act actually reversed this phenomena and clearly mentioned that the Muslim husband will pay maintenance about only for the iddat period and not beyond that. And this caused a big controversy. Now, this husband from Telangana is saying that because I have this act, I'll only pay the amount for 3 months and I'll not pay the amount after this. But it is not about this one case only. There are many cases. There is an evolution of cases. Firstly, we can see 2001 Daniel Latifi case. In this case, Supreme Court says that the 1986 Act, which was brought by Rajiv Gandhi government, this act is good. This act is okay. And for the iddat period, the Muslim husband will provide the amount. But the court said that we are extending the right of Muslim women to get the maintenance till she gets remarried. That means we may say iddat period is for 3 months only. But in case she doesn't get married in 3 months, gets married after 6 months or 7 months, so till that time, husband will have to pay the maintenance amount, and that will be under the section 125 of CRPC. Because there are now 2 acts and there is some contradiction. So we are referring to it again and again. In 2009, there is a case Shabana Bano versus Imran Khan, in which the court again said that even after the expiry of Iddat period, we will provide the maintenance. In 2019, Patna High Court said that a woman will have choice that she may go for Section 125 of CRPC or she may give call for Section 1986 Act. So now we have come to 2024, in which this Telangana couple has went to Supreme Court, and now Supreme Court has concluded and gave this final conclusion saying that a woman will have a choice, and we will look at the woman and see whether she is independent or not. If a woman is financially independent, she can take care of herself. In that case, she should apply for the maintenance only under 1986 Act. So what will happen? She will get maintenance only for 3 months. And in case there is a family in which the woman is not capable of earning, not financially independent, she should apply under Section 125 of CRPC. Supreme Court clearly says that even if we have two contradictory laws, we will find some harmony among these laws, and we will look at the core objective of the Constitution. If you look at Article 15, Clause 3, it says that we have to ensure life of dignity for women at all stages of their life. So to ensure dignity of a woman, we'll have to provide maintenance to her. So even if there are contradictions, we will solve the contradiction. And court has actually focused on the secular nature of Indian laws, because there is this CRPC section which is applicable to every woman. It includes Muslim women, also Hindu women. So laws are secular in nature and they are applicable to everyone. Also, court has focused on the social justice, which is one of the core philosophy of Indian Constitution. Whatever laws we bring, the objective has to be very clear. The objective is to provide social justice to these women. So that's why we can consider this article as important. The next article is related to caste census. We need to study what is caste census and caste survey. From syllabus perspective, GS paper 2 includes mechanisms, laws, institutions and bodies which are important for the protection of vulnerable sections in India. If we look at one of the previous year questions from 2020, it asks, has caste lost its relevance in understanding the multicultural Indian society? Elaborate your answer with illustrations. So we can see caste has been very important when it comes to examination also. So we'll read this article in detail. If we look at the context of this issue, many political parties are consistently giving a call for conducting caste census in India. Because caste census can be conducted only by the central government, many political parties at the regional level are giving call to the central government. They are building a pressure on the central government that they should conduct caste census immediately. Now, first of all, we'll try to understand what is census and then we'll try to understand what is caste census. Census is a comprehensive document which shows demography of a region. Demography means what is the number of population living in that region, whether that population includes more male population or female. Then by age criteria, how many people are below 18, how many are 60 plus, everything will be included in the census document. And such a census is conducted every 10 years in India. So this is taking place since British time. We see that the decadal census document is being prepared since 1881. Now, why do we need such document? If you look at any government body, any policy maker, they need data. If we are bringing any subsidy, if we are bringing any reservation or any policy, in that case, unless you know how many people will be affected through this, how many people actually require this reservation, you cannot come up with a good policy. That's why we say such census has to be conducted periodically. And we observe that this census falls under Union List under Schedule 7 of the Constitution. That means central government will have the complete authority to make any law related to census and not any state government as such. The next part is to understand what is caste census. Now, whenever we are taking up any census, if we start adding up the data related to caste of an individual, then we will call it a caste census. Now, this data will include demographics as well as caste related information. So, in 1952, we observed what government did. They brought a separate data from this census related to SC and ST community. Why this was done? Because we provided parliamentary reservation in parliament as well as state assembly to SC and ST community. But we did not provide any such reservation to any other caste. So what government did? They provided data related to SC and ST community only. But when it comes to data related to other castes, government thought that if we publish this data, then the social divisions that already exist in India will be strengthened. We already are divided in different castes. There can be caste conflicts. There can be a demand for reservation among other castes. So government thought we will not publish this data at all. So if you look at the last census, 2011 census, government took the data from people, but they did not actually publish it. Now, do we think that this caste census is actually important for us or not? If we look at the social imperative, for people living in the society, caste matters to them. Whenever they are going for any kind of marriage, they look for caste. Whenever they are living in a particular area, they look for area where the people of same caste live. Whenever they go for election or electoral politics, people vote for a guy who belongs to their caste. And whenever they go for any kind of interaction, they prefer a person from same caste. That means for people, caste matters, and that's why for us, caste census matters. Secondly, if we look at the legal imperative, we are providing a reservation and public policy which is based on the caste. So unless we have data related to caste, how can we perform well when it comes to such policies? Third, the administrative imperative. We brought the reservation already, but now are we giving the reservation in the rightful manner? Do we need to add some other caste in the reservation, or do we need to remove some caste from the reservation mechanism? We need to know that, and for that such census is required. Last is the moral imperative. We have observed that there is a dominant section in the society which is gaining traction with time, and there is one section in the society which is already vulnerable and getting vulnerable with time. So there is a moral imperative that we should conduct a caste census and check if there are some castes or some individuals in a particular caste, are they living in a backward environment since independence? Have we changed anything with reservation or not? So we need to even subcategorize such castes also. In that case, caste census becomes important. But there are some individuals who are saying we should not go for any caste census as such. They say that if we bring caste census, that will divide our society further. There can be demand for reservation from other communities also. For example, Marathas, Jats are demanding reservation, and such demands will further be fueled. And there will be some administrative challenges which may include that we need to go for census in detail, we may require more manpower. All these issues will be there. But people who are supporting this caste census, they are saying that if we want to make really good policies, we need caste census. If there is a good information available, only then that policy will be good. Secondly, we want to bring justice in the society. For that, this census is required. Then, if you do not bring caste census, there will be arbitrary decision making. There is a way that a political party may bring reservation for a particular community who is their vote bank. So this may happen. And historically, we are anyhow bringing the information of caste. So we should continue that. This is what people are observing or they are arguing. Now, if we look at one other phenomena, that is called as caste survey. And we heard this news many a times that Bihar government has conducted a caste survey. We said that the power to conduct caste census lies with the central government and not the state government. What state government at max do is conduct a normal survey. Survey is like you go and ask people some questions. You take up survey as if taking up opinion of people. So such surveys are conducted by government, by state governments, because they could not do caste census. It is kind of a mechanism to politically charge up the environment and build pressure on the central government. Also, this will help them make decisions, the informed decisions or policy making. But please understand, because this census part is not included in the state list, there is no legal backing for surveys. There is legal backing for the caste census only. Now, as a way forward, what can be done? Firstly, what we can do is we can amend this Census Act 1948 and we can make it mandatory for the government to enumerate the caste related data. Now, what we have done is that union government is having the power, the arbitrary power to decide whether we will include it or whether we will not. So, we can make it mandatory. Second, we can take opinion from the experts. If we bring sociologists or anthropologists and they start creating a list of castes, that will be very helpful for us. We can then finalize by taking opinion from the citizens of India too. Third, what we can use is a detailed questionnaire. If we bring a questionnaire through which we can know caste as well as subcaste, because not everyone knows about these subcastes, those questionnaires can help us. Next, we can make use of technology and we can put all these castes in one chip, or the information can be put in the mobile phone, and through that such census can be conducted and made easy. The next article is about mega dam that is being built in Arunachal Pradesh. So we need to read this Upper Siang Multi-Purpose Storage Project. From syllabus perspective, GS Paper 2 includes policy and interventions for development, and GS Paper 3 includes conservation, environmental pollution, environmental impact assessment. If we look at a previous year question, it says, with reference to river Teesta, consider the following statements. The source of river Teesta is same as that of Brahmaputra, but it flows through Sikkim. River Rangit originates in Sikkim and it is a tributary of river Teesta. And river Teesta falls into Bay of Bengal at the border of India and Bangladesh. If you look at this question, it's a very factual question, and river Teesta was in news that year. So we need to study about the Siang river in this article in a factual manner too. Now, if you look at the context, Government of India is building this Upper Siang project. This is a dam project. We are trying to build hydropower. That is, using this dam, we are going to generate electricity that is up to 11,000 megawatts. It's a big project, we can say. Government of India initially thought that we'll bring two different projects. One will be Upper Stage 1 and other one will be Siang Upper Stage 2. But later on, Government of India thought we'll bring one big project instead of these two. Now, the core objective of government is to counter Chinese projects. China is actually building some super dams. One super dam is in Tibet's Medoc County region, and you can observe why I am calling it super dam, because its capacity is to generate 60,000 megawatt electricity. So we are trying to counter it. So strategically, this mega dam is very important for India. But we are observing consistently the local activists in the region, they are saying we don't want this dam. This is going against us. Why they are saying that? They are saying there are some environmental concerns. If you build this dam, at least 300 villages will be submerged under water. Whatever biodiversity ecosystem exists in this region, that will collapse or that will be threatened. And the people living in this region, what about their livelihood? What about their cultural practices? How are they going to sustain? That is a major concern for these activists. Apart from that, people will have to be displaced from their original region. For example, this Adi tribe that lives in this region, you will have to relocate them to some other area. Are they going to survive in that new area? If someone lives in plain area, you ask them to live in the hilly area, it is very difficult for them. So that's why local activists are saying we don't want this project. One more reason the activists are citing is that strategic framing. The activists are saying, how can you give more importance only to the national security and you can undermine the local resistance or the importance of local welfare? The people are showing their concerns related to this act called Forest Conservation Amendment Act 2. This act was brought by Government of India, and they said whichever border area is there and if there is a forest land in that region, that is up to 100 kilometers. The government can diverse that land, use that land for any other purpose. So the tribal population living in that forest region, they are feeling insecure because of this act. Now, because we said that factual information is important when it comes to such articles, so we'll read about that. The Siang River on which this project is being built. This river originates from the Chema Yongdong Glacier in Tibetan region. This river in Tibet is known as Sangpo River and it flows from west to east. The major Tibetan cities that are along this Sangpo River are Lhasa and Shigatse. When it enters into India, it enters first in the Upper Siang district of Arunachal Pradesh near the Tooting region. And in India, when it comes, the name changes and it becomes Siang River. There are some tributaries of this river and we must know about these tributaries such as Siom, Yamne and Subansiri rivers. And when they flow through the Arunachal Pradesh, they go for East Siang district. Then the river enters in Assam and it joins Lohit and Dibang rivers and combinedly they form the river Brahmaputra. So you should have a brief idea about Brahmaputra also. Brahmaputra starts from Assam and then it enters into Bangladesh and then ends in the Bay of Bengal. You can look at this map. Here the Siang River is visible to you. I suggest just read this map once or twice. So the next article is related to FCRA registration. It is important for us to know what is this FCRA Act, what is the registration, why it is required. From UPSC syllabus perspective, in GS paper 2, role of NGOs is mentioned and this FCRA licensing is done by the NGOs. So let's look at one of the previous year question related to this aspect. Examine critically the recent changes in the rule governing foreign funding of NGOs under Foreign Contribution Regulation Act FCRA. So they have directly asked about the amendments made in this act. So we'll study it in detail. Now what is the context? There is an NGO called Center for Financial Accountability. This NGO works for environment and human rights issues. Recently, this NGO came up with a particular report and that report talked about special economic zone operated by Adani Group in Kutch, Gujarat. They have actually criticized this project saying this will lead to some environmental hazards and health hazards. Now, as soon as we read about this report, we got another news that Ministry of Home Affairs cancelled the license, FCRA license of this particular NGO. So people are suspicious whether it is a politically motivated decision or not. Now, if we look at the official reasons cited by the government, the Ministry of Home Affairs, they are saying that there are some incorrect financial filings made by this NGO in documentation in year 2018 and 2019 and that's why under some clauses of FCRA, we are cancelling their registration. Now, this is the official reason. But if we try to understand it with a suspicious mind, we can see that the role of Adani Group or the role of politics is involved in this. But we are actually trying to understand the broader context of NGO's license being cancelled again and again. If you look at the last data, since 2015, 16,000 NGO registrations have been cancelled by Ministry of Home Affairs. So that means it is not about one or two NGOs. There is a broader issue involved related to this FCRA registration. Now, what is FCRA? Please understand, any non-governmental organization NGO works for a good cause, but to work for that good cause, they need money or funding. Such funding is provided by people like us, like volunteers. And just the way Indian citizens pay some amount to NGOs, some foreigners also contribute to these organizations. So when there is a foreign contribution made to any NGO, the government of India looks at it bit suspiciously. They check whether the person or the organization sending the money has an ulterior motive or not. If they have a different motive altogether and not a good cause as such, they will have to be checked and they will have to be stopped. So for that, this FCRA, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, was brought in. It was brought in 1976 during emergency, wherein Government of India thought that the internal security condition of India is not good, and in that case, we have to check any foreign funding that is coming to India. In 2010, government also brought an amendment saying that if any such funding comes to India and that causes some detrimental impact on the national interest of India, then we will not allow such funding at all. Then in 2020, there was another amendment made to make these provisions of FCRA more strict. Here, government said that any such foreign contribution which comes to any person or organization, they cannot transfer that amount to some other organization or some other person. They will have to keep it with themselves and use it for the cause they want to use. Apart from that, government said you can use this amount only up to 20% for administrative expenses. Government observed that some NGOs are what they are doing. If they take 1 crore from someone, 80% of it, somewhere around 80 lakh, they are saying we spent on administrative purpose. We bought some chairs, we paid the salaries, and for this they spent 80%. So government said this is not a good expense. You are actually making misuse of the FCRA clauses. Government said only 20% you can use. Apart from that, government said that the FCRA registration will be mandatory for any NGO that takes money from foreigners. Next, there is a specific bank account you need to have in the State Bank of India, that is specifically in the New Delhi branch, and from there only an NGO can operate or take money as foreign contribution. Then FCRA also prohibits such NGOs from many activities, such as you cannot represent by fictitious entities, you cannot go for any religious conversion, you cannot go for any communal tensions or seditions, or you cannot get involved with some candidates who are running for elections, journalists, media companies, government servants, etc., considering the role of money laundering or corruption in this. Apart from that, the validity of FCRA license is only for 5 years. As soon as 5 years are done, within 6 months, the NGO will have to renew the license. Otherwise, it will be cancelled by the government. In 2022, FCRA brought one more specific rule that there are some individuals who send money to their family members living in India. They are living in America, they are sending some amount to India. So there was a chance that FCRA was blocking that amount too. So government said that if such is the case, we will allow at max 10 lakh rupees to be sent and FCRA will not limit it. Apart from that, if we look at the concerns NGOs are having due to this FCRA, if you look at the NGO's perspective, they are saying you're bringing so strict compliance requirement and so much documentation has to be done that we will not be able to do each and everything, due to which the authority that is in power will misuse these clauses of FCRA and target and restrict such NGOs from working for the public good. Secondly, these are very lengthy procedures, the renewal process and all. It's a very lengthy, which leads to many delays, bureaucratic processes, and that will lead to the NGOs becoming ineffective. Thirdly, the NGOs are sometimes criticized for not showing transparency to a good extent. But sometimes you need to understand that NGOs are working at the grassroots level. It is not possible every time to give each and every detailed micro information to the authorities in the documentation. Fourth, there is a chance of political influence in the FCRA registration or the cancellation of FCRA registration, and NGOs are concerned about it. So the next article is about deep drilling program that is being carried out in Maharashtra. What is important for us? The scientific deep drilling and the reservoir-induced earthquakes. It is important from the syllabus GS paper 1 perspective, which includes geographical and geophysical phenomena, which includes earthquakes, and the disaster management part from GS paper 3. Let's look at a previous year question and you can understand how this topic is important for you. The question says, discuss about the vulnerability of India to earthquake-related hazards. Give examples including salient features of major disasters caused by earthquakes in different parts of India during the last 3 decades. So it's a direct question related to earthquakes. So you can expect such questions. Let's start with the article. What is the context? There is a ministry called Ministry of Earth Science Under this ministry, there is a specialized body called Borehole Geophysics Research Laboratory. This specialized body is going to execute a scientific deep drilling program in Maharashtra's Koyna-Varna region. Now, what is this scientific deep drilling mission? Scientists are saying that we can study the rock types, the planet's history, some kind of earthquake, specifically this reservoir-induced earthquake, and the energy resources that are there in the earth crust. To study that, we need to go deeper in the earth crust. We usually see that we dig the earth's crust for the boreholes. We want the water, and for boreholes, we usually go for 100 feet deeper, 200 feet deeper. But scientists are saying we'll go for 6 kilometers deeper in the earth crust. And scientists are very clear that if we do this experiment at the Koyna-Varna region of Maharashtra, we can specifically study this reservoir-induced earthquake. Now we need to know what is this specific earthquake. Now we know about earthquake, it is a natural phenomena. But sometimes we human do some kinds of mistake which leads to earthquakes. And reservoir-induced seismicity or this kind of earthquake is an example of man-made earthquake. What happens is that when you build a reservoir we can understand as a dam. When you are building a big dam, that dam can store immense water. That water builds an immense pressure on that region, on that surface. The water has massive weight that causes stress in that region. And that water also infiltrates in the faults and fractures of those regions, leading to a big earthquake in that region. And it's not like there will be one earthquake. There can be frequent earthquakes in that region due to this reservoir. And we have observed this happening in Maharashtra due to the Koyna Dam that was built. So what scientists are doing? They are doing the experiment in the same region to study this kind of earthquake. We have other examples too, such as Tehri Dam in Uttarakhand, globally in United States, Hoover Dam, and in Zambia, Zimbabwe region, there is Kariba Dam. All these are examples of reservoir-induced earthquakes or seismicity. Now, when the scientists will go for this experiment, there will be some challenges. First challenge is the labor-intensive nature of this program. You will require so many people that it becomes very challenging to conduct this experiment. Then you also require a lot of capital. Why? Because drilling to 6 kilometers is not easy. You require advanced technology, and for advanced technology, you require investment. So it's a capital intensive program. Second, there will be harsh conditions in such depth. You will observe very high temperature, very high darkness, and there will be very high pressure in that region. Now, whatever equipments, devices, materials you have, are they going to survive there? That's a question mark for us. Third, there will be some technical complexity. Even if you try to bring the experimental mechanism, whether you will be able to complete it precisely. You want to send your machine to a particular location in the earth crust, but if it goes to some other location and does not become precise, that may cause some other complications. You cannot solve it further. So these challenges will be there. Apart from that, there is a risk of big failure. Because we do not know much about the earth crust or the deeper phenomena, there is a chance that we may see some unexpected geological formations. And even if you want to solve that problem, who is going there inside? That's a big question. So it's a complex and a very complicated kind of program scientific experiment. So now we'll discuss some practice questions for prelims as well as mains. The first question is about Siang River. With reference to Siang River, consider the following statements. Number 1, Siang River originates from Chema Yongdong Glacier in Tibet. Now this is what we read, so it is correct. Second, the Siang River is known as Sangpo in Tibet and flows through the city of Lhasa. This is also factually correct. Third, in India, Siang River flows through Arunachal Pradesh and later joins Lohit and Dibang rivers in Assam to form Brahmaputra. This is also factually correct point. So we will mark it as correct. The fourth point, the Brahmaputra river flows through Assam and Bangladesh before emptying into Arabian Sea. Now this is wrong. It doesn't enter into Arabian Sea. Rather, it enters into Bay of Bengal. So the fourth statement is incorrect. So the answer is B, 1, 2 and 3. Next question. This question is about FCRA. Consider the following statements regarding Foreign Contribution Regulation Act FCRA. The FCRA was enacted in 1985 to regulate foreign donations to individuals and associations in India. It may seem correct, but it was not enacted in 1985. I said it was enacted in the time of emergency, that is 1976. So this statement is wrong. Second, the 2020 amendment to the FCRA increased the limit for administrative expenses from 50% to 70% of foreign contributions. This is also incorrect because the limit was actually reduced and made only 20%, so that people should not misuse it. So this statement is wrong. Third statement, FCRA allows the transfer of foreign contribution to any other person or organization without any restriction. Very extreme statement and extremely wrong, because FCRA has a provision that you cannot transfer the amount to any other person or any other association or organization as such. All three statements are wrong, so answer is D, none of the above. Now the next question. Consider the following statements. The Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986 allows divorced Muslim women to seek maintenance for lifetime. Now we had discussed that in 1986, Rajiv Gandhi government brought this act and said that the maintenance will be provided only for 3 months, or the time period of iddat, as we said. So this lifetime provision is completely wrong. Second, divorced Muslim women are eligible for maintenance under Section 125 of CRPC, which is a secular law. That is absolutely correct, and recent judgment also said that this is right. Third, Section 125 CRPC reflects the constitutional commitment under Article 15(3) of the Constitution of India. This is also correct because Article 15(3) clearly says that if there is any women that lives in India, government is obliged to make efforts for them to protect them. For gender justice also, government will make some provisions. So this statement is absolutely right. So 2 and 3 are correct. Answer should be B. The next question. Consider the following. Differential ground settlement, soil liquefaction, avalanches, tsunami, ground lurching. How many of the above are the immediate hazardous effects of an earthquake? Now this question has been taken from the NCERT class 11th booklet. If you study NCERT, you will be able to answer this question very easily, that earthquake will lead to all of these 5 phenomena, whether it is tsunami, ground lurching or anything. All these are effect of earthquake. So all of the above is the answer. And the next question is about the census. The census in India is conducted every decade by Union Ministry of Home Affairs. That's a correct statement. The census serves as a critical tool for enumerating the population, distributing the resources, monitoring societal shifts, and delineating electoral boundaries. That is also absolutely correct, and we discussed this. Third, the authority to legislate on matters pertaining to census falls under state list. Now this is absolutely wrong because it falls under union list under 7th schedule. So this is wrong. Fourth statement, the first census in India was conducted in 1881. That is absolutely correct. Third statement is wrong. That means 1, 2 and 4 is the answer. Option A is correct. Now we'll discuss one mains practice question 2. Discuss the significance of conducting a caste census. They're asking about significance. Caste census in India. Analyze the arguments both in favor and against it. Provide recommendations on how to effectively implement a caste census, ensuring accurate, comprehensive data collection. So they have asked multiple dimensions and you will have to answer each and every dimension. Significance, arguments in favor, against, and you have to give some recommendations as way forward. So what you will do is, in the introduction, either you can briefly explain what is caste census, or you can give the historical context about it, how it started, or you can also talk about the current issue, what is happening right now as an introduction. And in the body part, you will deal with the first dimension, that is the significance of it. So we had discussed the significance, that there are some social imperatives for society. Caste matters for marriage, for residential purpose or anything. You can discuss it. In legal imperative, you can talk about the reservation mechanisms for which there is some legal backing, and caste census is must for that. Then for administrative imperative also, for administration, because the public policy that we are making, it is based on the caste differences. So caste census is required. Then moral imperative also we talked about, that there is need of subcategorization. We need to check whether the status quo is maintained in such a way that some castes are taking up advantages and there are some castes or some individuals who are still backward, still marginalized. So moral imperative is there, and that's why we need a caste census. Then you will talk about why we are favoring this particular policy which goes for caste census. We say in policy making, your decisions will be informed decisions. You will have data and data will tell you the reality. You can do inclusive development in the right manner. Also, when you're implementing the reservation policy, you need to have the data again. Unless you have the data, you cannot know whether we should provide the reservation to Maratha community or Jat community, or we should not. We need to check their backwardness too, and we need data. Then we need to prevent arbitrary or politically motivated decisions. We said that sometimes we hear about this news that it is politically motivated and not necessarily a particular caste group requires reservation as such. And the historical precedent also, that since a long time we have been conducting caste census. So this is what you can discuss. After that, you need to talk about arguments against it. Now against, you can talk about the social divisions that will be strengthened, we said. Then there will be administrative challenge to collect that data, each and every data, the caste, subcaste, everything, and concerns of new demands for reservation and charging up of politics due to this issue. Then give your recommendation. Those recommendations could be amending the Census Act of 1948, taking up perspectives of sociologists and anthropologists, and bring a questionnaire through which you can get complete data set. You can make use of technology also for collecting that data, and you can make use of judicial review, because judiciary can play a key role in this, and we can conduct a good caste census. This is how you can go in flow. And at the end, as a part of conclusion, you can either summarize the entire story, or you can say that we need a comprehensive and accurate data collection for the inclusive development, and we need a caste census. So with this, we have come to the end of Daily News Analysis. Please like, share and subscribe to the YouTube channel of Narayana IAS Academy for further updates and further videos. Thank you.